Well, hi, my name's Andy Tidy and welcome to another episode of Life at 2.3 miles an hour. Now, this is not a history video. I was looking on YouTube and I was looking around to see if I could find a video which described how best to service a Beta 38 engine, and that's the engine that powers our motorboat. And surprisingly enough, I found very little. And I thought, good idea to reflect on how to service an engine. Now, let me just be clear here. I am not a marine diesel engineer, but I have owned and I have serviced this engine for 17 years of its 20 years life. And it's never let me down. So I'm suspecting that I'm probably doing some things right. However, because no one's ever taught me, I'm opening this up so that if you think I'm doing something wrong, let me know, I'll improve my practices. Now, a bit of a heads up on this engine. The Beta 38 is based on a Kubota engine. It's a standard Japanese engine that's used as a donkey engine in all sorts of applications in industry. It's designed as a low-running diesel engine that just runs and runs and runs. Now, this has been marinized by Beta, and it's generally recognised as one of the workhorses of the inland waterways. This particular Beta engine has done 7,500 hours. It had done about 600 hours when I first got my hands on it. And I recently asked a boatyard who was having a look at it, and I said, well, how long are they likely to go on for? When do I need to start thinking about replacing them? And after having given the engine a bit of a look over, the engineer looked at me and said, well, Andy, you know, this engine is a bit like you and me. It's on the wrong side of middle age, but if you keep it well lubed, it'll run for years. Well, I took him at his word, and I pay great attention to the lubrication of this engine. So that's where we're going to start. Now, of all the things I do, this is probably the most crucial. I don't know how much of this you can read, but on the notes section of my phone, I've got written down all the different filter types and the specifications for what I need and what I've used, when I've serviced it and when it next needs servicing. So I knew that I needed to change my engine oil at 7,550 hours, which is pretty much spot on. I also changed my gearbox oil, which is automatic transmission fluid, Rexon 3, and that was replaced last November, and I need to change with the engine oil, so I'll do that this time. Now, the fuel filter, which is spin on and just like the oil filter, that was changed at 7,300 but doesn't need changing till 8,050, so I'm still a long way off that. Normally in a season I'd get through one a year, but I'm not going to need that until next summer. And the air filter is similar, but I'm going to just have a look at the air filter and see how it looks. Now, before we get going on this, good idea to warm up the engine a little bit, only for 5 minutes, just enough to get it so that it's warm to the touch here, but not hot. It thins down the oil and it makes it a lot easier to extract. The key things for the oil system are your oil filler cap down here, which we need to get off because we need to create an ability for some air to get into the system. You've got your dipstick that runs down the back here, but we don't need that at the minute. The oil filter is around the back, which we'll have to get to, and this little brass pump here is the way of pumping the oil out of the sump, because the sump is so close to the bottom of the boat you can't get at the sump plug. So there's a pumping mechanism to do that. So that's where we're going next, to get the oil out from around beside the engine. So I'll turn off and I'll squeeze in. Now, I'm 6'3", and that's a squeeze, but that's where we're going. Now, before I squeeze into the engine bay, because it is so tight, I always find it's a good idea to get my bits and pieces I need lined up. So we start with some protective rubber gloves to keep my hands clean away from the oil, a bag to pick up the waste oil, all the waste bits. 5 litres. This engine needs exactly 5 litres, and my favourite oil is Morris, and 1540 is the consistency that we need. A chain oil filter remover, an empty bottle to put the oil into, some blue roll to mop up any spills, and interestingly there is a choice of oil filters I've got in stock. Now this one is an official Beta Marine oil filter, and this one is the Fram alternative. Now they look so completely different, but if you line up where they screw on, they actually are exactly the same screw fitting. So I guess this one has probably got a bit more straining capability in it, this one less so. But because I change my oil filters absolutely religiously every 250 hours, this one does the trick okay, and it fits into the hole a bit better. This one, I haven't got much space to get the chain around it. Now I always think there must be an easier way of getting in here. This is the view from where I'm at. Unbelievably tight down here in the engine bay, but this is the filter I need to remove, and this is the pump that I need to activate, so I'll get cracking on emptying out the oil. So first we open up the valve here, which lets the oil flow up from the sump. Then we need to take off the plug from the end of the pump and put it somewhere safe. And then we introduce the collection bottle, which is 5 litres, and just put that up over there, and that will collect the oil as it pumps out. And we start to pump, and we pump, and we pump, and we pump. Takes a couple of minutes, this. This is probably the least exciting part of the task. Incredibly cramped, bent double, can't really breathe, and I'm always feeling a little bit desperate by the time I finish it. Now the next task is to get this old oil filter off. Now it goes on hand tight only, but it always tightens up in the course of time. So we're going to have to get it off, and we're going to be using this oil filter wrench. It's a wrench that I've had since the days when you used to service your own cars. It still isn't very easy, and it always takes me a few goes to get this thing off. I think probably the hardest thing is its location. It's so awkward to get at. So if I tighten it up and then just give it a bit of a twist sideways, it just starts to turn. And once you get the thing turning, you can rotate it by hand. But I don't want to make a huge mess, and these things do make a mess. So, set up my receptacle first. And then undo the filter into that. That's one old filter off. Before I finish with it, the new filter needs a little bit of lubrication around on the seal to give it a good seal, so a little bit of the old engine oil does the trick. Put that into the poly bag, and then it's just a case of putting the new filter on and spinning it on into place. And say hand tight is all you need. because if you do it up any tighter, this just will not come off next time. So it's a new filter, and while I'm down here, I spilled a little bit of oil getting that out. So rather than leave dirty engine oil sitting in the bilge, which is bad form, just wipe it out. Now, while we're down in this back end of the engine, it's a good job to just check up on your fan belts or your drive belts. On this engine there's two drive belts. There's the big fat one here, which is quite new, put on about 2 years ago. It'll turn around 90 degrees, you can see that. It'll deflect in and out by maybe a centimetre. That's about right, the strength is enough. It's driving the main alternator, which powers the main battery bank. The second fan belt, which is down here, is a smaller one, but actually it's more important. It's a toothed drive belt, V-belt, and it drives the small alternator, which is the alternator here, but it also drives the water pump, which is back in here. So if the small belt fails, not only do you lose the small alternator, but you also lose your water pump and your water cooling. So this is the one that's really got to keep going. Now the belt's okay, maybe could do with a tighten up. If I hear any squealing in the future when it starts up, I'll know that that needs a bit of tightening up. But that all looks okay. I said it was tight under here, and somehow, you know, this space under the engine seems to have got smaller. I think maybe metal shrinks with age. It can't be anything to do with me. I mean, it can't be that I'm getting fatter and stiffer. Surely not. So, you can see why I don't like doing this, but I do get in there 3 times a year to do the job. So all that leaves is us needing to refill the engine with engine oil. It's important to use the specification of engine oil required by the manufacturers, so go online, grab a copy of their instruction manual, and it's important that you both fill it up but you don't overfill it. If you underfill it, it won't lubricate the engine and it will wear. If you overfill it, it can smash, the oil can smash against the bottom end of the engine and it all foams up, and again it doesn't work. But I do know that this boat takes exactly 5 litres. So we'll pour in the 5 litres and then we'll fire up the engine and we'll get the oil moving around, fill up the oil filter, and that way we're leaving the engine with nice clean oil all over the engine for the winter. If you leave old engine oil sitting in there, there'll be lots of bits and contaminants inside the oil itself, because you saw it all came out very black, and basically they'll turn into sludge at the bottom of the engine and be very difficult to get rid of. So top tip, end of the season, fresh oil every time. There we go, that's your 5 litres. Now it's pretty difficult to read a dipstick when it's got clean oil on it, but if you take out your dipstick and you hold it against some blotting paper like that and take it off, you can see that the oil is sitting just below full level. So we're good to go on that. Now it's important that we get rid of the old used engine oil responsibly. So what I tend to do is to stick the old used engine oil back into the container that it came in, and then I take it down to the local recycling centre and I tip it into the bin down there. I do this every 250 hours, and I do about 750 hours a year. So that means I'll use up 3 lots of oil during the course of a season, and I just store it up in these tubs in the bilge, and I get rid of it once a year. There we go, and I'll keep the old container for use at my next service. So that's the oil changed. All I need to do now is to fire up the engine, run it for a minute or two, and make sure that I get that oil all around the engine and protecting it against the ravages for the 6 months when it's pretty much going to lie idle. So let's start her up. Now, I've mentioned about engines aging. Excuse the engine noise here. If you take the top off the filler cap for the oil, you can get an idea of the amount of compression that's being lost through the beside the cylinder rings. So let's have a listen to this. Now you can tell by the change in the sound as you take the oil filler cap off that there is quite a lot of gas escaping from the top of the rocker box cover, and that will mean that there's a fair amount of exhaust gases coming past the cylinders, past the pistons and up the cylinders, which is an indication of wear. At the minute it's not huge, but it's just a feature of engines as they get a bit older.